From Inform a Tech Target, I'm David Essex, and this is Enterprise Apps Unpacked. Digital twins are one of those information technologies with real honest-to-goodness usefulness today and amazing potential in the long run that's sometimes obscured by all the hype surrounding them. When they started taking off around 5 years ago, they seemed like the next big thing, or one of the next big things. But then people started slapping the term digital twins on seemingly everything, and it was hard to know where to begin or even whether to begin. To make sense of it all, it's important to keep an accurate definition in mind. A true digital twin requires a physical entity or process that exists in reality and some kind of digital representation of it in software, with a data link between the two. The real differentiator is that data connection. That's where most of the power is. It's also where much of the complexity is. Now, I'm a skeptical person by nature, and my radar really perks up whenever I hear some amazing new software has a major data management and integration problem connected to it. With digital twins, you need sensors and other electronic connections between the twins and what they represent, and you have to collect data that can be put to practical use, analyze it, and manage it on an ongoing basis. So when I first heard about twin matrix technologies, I was intrigued by its claim to add geospatial information and AI to achieve measurable ROI and make digital twins scalable so they can, for example, help manage an entire airport and save millions of dollars. But I had questions about what it's really like to use these twins and what the challenges are. The company's founder and CEO, Eric Liu, joins us from Singapore, where Twin Matrix is headquartered. Today, we'll do a deep dive, explore how spatial digital twins work, how they're used, and what it takes to deploy them and maximize their potential. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Enterprise Apps Unpacked for the real story on the software that runs your business. Eric, thanks very much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Your company is called Twin Matrix Technology, and you make something called spatial digital twins.
That's right.
How are they different from other digital twins, and what makes your twins spatial?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when we talk about digital twins, that's one of the things where, in a way, it's sort of as big as a smart city or as small as a piece of equipment. And I think that's something where I heard previously in your podcast talking to the Digital Twin Consortium as well, trying to define it. And I think that's really one of the key things where we differentiate because we're doing a lot of the application use cases. So when I define spatial digital twins, it's really not just about the what or the why, but it's about the where. And I think that's really critical for the application of spatial digital twins because it's really when it comes to understanding how that applies, for example, to airports, right? These are vast areas of space and we're not just terminals, not just indoors, because everybody's been inside of an airport walking around and it could be a 2D or 3D map. But at the same time, the key thing that we focus on also, it's actually the entire environment, even the air side, even the airplanes, aircrafts, and where potentially those aircrafts can go. So I think, again, to reiterate, it's really about the where of how the digitalization or digital twins can map live IoT, live assets, and then how do you actually get the digital representation of the physical world?
Mm-hmm. So to drill down a little more, I guess, can you describe the main components of your software? And I understand you also offer services and explain what their purpose is in creating and deploying digital twins.
Yeah, sure. So Spatialverse is the platform. So I think in terms of any type of platform, right, when we think about it, it's really taking input in or data in and then data out. So what does that mean? So when it comes to any type of spatial twin that we're really deploying, it takes into, of course, maps, right? I basically split it into two different types of data. Static data, which means, let's say it could be a CAD drawing, could be a 3D BIM file, or it could be really just a floor plan. So that's really one of the static information. And then the dynamic information. So that means real-time live IoT. And of course, IoT can be anything. It could be potentially CCTV. It could be a video stream. It could be a live GPS or RTK tracker for an aircraft, or it could be for a vehicle. So you take these types or categories of data, you pump it into the system to maintain and manage all of that. And then what gets spat out is really, how do we actually utilize it? How do we actually interact with it? So the experience layer is really critical. So at the top side of things, we think about, well, at the end of the day, there's always machine-to-machine interaction, right? There's bits, zeros and ones pumping through all of the wires, but we don't really care about that as human beings. What we really care about is, how do we interact with this darn data, right? How do we make sense of it all, right? Do I have to literally look at hundreds or hundreds of thousands of lines of code or an Excel spreadsheet, or can I get some type of visualization understanding of that data? And that's really how we sort of break it down. And where it comes to the experiential part, it can be as simple as accessing something on your phone, or it could be as sophisticated as interacting using AR or VR, which again, recently, I think you also talked about spatial computing, right? That's really another really key aspect, because at the end of the day, it's really about the mapping and making sure that whether it's 2D or 3D, the live data or the information sticks to that map.
Shifting gears a little bit here, your website uses the term low code, no code, and says your mission is to democratize spatial twins, including for individuals.
Yeah.
And I have to confess, I've been a bit skeptical of this term when I've heard it, especially from ERP vendors who I follow pretty closely. But it sounded like, oh, anybody can do this, the business users. But I've been hearing lately that most users are really still the developers and companies, and not the business line of business people. So can your low code, no code tools really be used by people who don't already have some experience with programming or at least configuring software?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because at the end of the day, I think as software sort of gets into this AI territory, where we talk about, well, can we actually just, in the future, we could just talk to the computer and it'll spit out information. Or if you talk to the computer, it can actually generate some information. So I think this is really critical, because I like to think about it as sort of human-computer interaction. Since the days of DOS, since the days of Lotus 1-2-3, which, yes, I've been alive to remember that, it's really about, how do we get data, how do we understand it, and how do we interact with it? So I think when it comes to the goal of getting to the point where it's no code, I think we're very close. We're not talking about AGI or anything like that. What we're talking about is, right now, let's say at the airport or inside of a smart factory or building, there's people there, right? And there's different departments. And every department is actually managing something. They're managing some type of information. Let's say safety security. They really focus on CCTVs, right? The cameras, the safety cameras. And when it comes to that, when you spatialize a camera onto our maps, 2D or 3D, that camera exists somewhere on Earth. And that camera exists somewhere in the building or outside the building. So that is really critical to a lot of the things that we do. So now we think about it, right? I have kids, they're 8 and 5, and they love Minecraft. It's crazy how easy it is for them to construct worlds in Minecraft. And of course, that has nothing to do with the physical world. However, they're completely using the no-code aspect of creation. And then they're taking it one step further to make it actually more interactive, right? Levers, things that actually trigger. So again, when you have those very low-code or no-code type of applications, it's really about the human-computer interface. Like, how do we manipulate and work with computers to get what we want? So when it comes, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can see now, as you explain it that way, how there are, in the things we're getting used to using, including things that are for entertainment, enough like sort of levers and controls and, yes, configuration options, maybe checkboxes that give you a fair amount of control.
And my background, actually, I grew up working in the video game industry. And very early on, about 20 years ago, I've always thought that, hey, if people in this industry are so immersed, love this software, why can't we take this into the professional industries? Because at the end of the day, it's really about the design of software, the design of user experiences, interfaces. So if we can make it essentially as easy to use as, let's say, an iPad, right? Because I remember my son was 1.5 and he started, using the touchscreen and moving things around. If it can be so easy for kids, can we make it and apply it to the real world? And that's really the philosophy behind a lot of the things that Twin Matrix does. Is 50% of the time, it's really design elements so that we make it easy for people to onboard and for them to easily, at a glance, understand the entire environment that's happening and to make decisions and operate it.
So what is your actual mix of users in your customer base? Users are not always the same as customers. So do you mostly have programmers or other IT types, or do you actually have some line of business users in, say, the production or procurement department of a manufacturer?
Yeah. So our largest customer, Changi Airport, which is one of the top airports in the world, is using our platform right now across close to 30 to 40 different departments. So some are in what we call user acceptance testing, and some are in production. And I would say close to 90 to 95% of the users on our platform in various different departments, they don't understand code. And I don't expect them to. Because usually what happens is that we go through our channel partners, our partners who actually implement our platform for the customers. So when it comes to the end user, right, you can think about, for example, fire department, right, very critical part of an airport. So when they go to, let's say, one of the terminals, they need to understand quickly what is going on, right? For example, is it a smoke alarm that's having a fault? Is it a sprinkler system? And of course, with the airport, more and more of these devices have IoT, they have connectivity. And immediately, it'll actually ping our system to tell the fire department, and when they're actually approaching terminals, where exactly spatially it is. And previously, prior to what we've actually started mapping out, they came up to the airport and they had a printed out map. And there's so many problems with that, right? Just to begin with, if you think about it, because it could be outdated, right? I would say 90% of the time that's probably outdated because things just change. You have to update hardware, things have faults. And we created this map to actually understand exactly spatially where it is, and it'll guide them very easily using their phone to wayfind and route them to the exact issue.
Which industries tend to be most represented in your customer base?
Well, so we focus primarily right now on aviation, on airports, because it's vast, right? It requires a lot of space. At the same time, it's also mission critical. So for example, when it comes to dangerous situations or complicated spaces, our technology shines the most. And at the same time, it's really about the interoperability of different departments collaborating together. And I think that's really a key of where we see the spatial digital twin approach goes, because it's not really about one department, because they can use another mapping provider or solution or digital twin, but it's about interoperability between other departments. So if something in one system that one department's managing, like a CCTV, why can't they share that specific CCTV to another department if something went wrong? So it's really about how do we work better together, even face to face, using technology to empower and actually improve efficiency.
The communication that you were just talking about, is some of that from other enterprise platforms that your technology works with, or is it most of it happening on your platform? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's really about where the information lies, where the data silos are. And I think these days, even when any system gets deployed, any type of IoT system, or even a safety security system gets deployed, it's collecting what we call digital data dust, where essentially it's just saving into a data lake, it's just sitting there. Nobody really refers to it until something happens. And I think that's really the critical part, where if it's saving all the information and you start sort of bridging things together and overlaying it, right? Whether it's CCTV, or let's say there could be a live flight that's happening right now, or another asset that's happening on the airside, let's say a baggage handler. All of that information can be known between all three systems to give it more spatial intelligence and understanding. The more layers of data that we overlay onto our system, because we are platform and we are vendor agnostic, the more information and use cases that, let's say, the operations staff can actually empower their staff.
Mhm. So one of your most prominent customers is Changi Airport, which you've mentioned a couple of times, I think. And according to your website, it used the twin matrix technology to cut operational costs by $10 million.
Mhm.
Can you share the highlights of that case study? You've touched on it and mentioned the departments, but can you kind of describe
Mhm.
a little more about how your technology is being used by the airport?
Sure. So it's not just for, let's say, tenant management, right? Because at such a massive airport, I think there's close to over 600 tenants. And these tenants change, right? When we talk about tenants, it could be F&B, it could be shopping, it could be other use cases, for example, warehouses that are used by Singapore Airlines. It could be really anything, any physical space that's being rented out. So that's just one or two departments. But then what about other departments like facilities management? And then there's a whole can of worms when it comes to FM that we think about and we talk about. And then, of course, we have operation centers, airport operation centers that are actually embedding our technology inside of theirs. Because the key thing that we've noticed over many years of doing these digital twins is that if the operations staff do not use it on a day-to-day continuous basis, then essentially becomes a visualization. And if it's just a basic visualization where they turn on once in a blue moon, it's not really effective or efficient. And I think when it comes to Singapore especially, right, it's really about operational efficiency. Another reason why the airport keeps winning. I think recently they won the 13th time in a row, the top airport in the world. So this is something where we want to empower different use cases as at the same time interoperability to actually determine and understand what they can improve on. So when it comes to the more data, and I mentioned this earlier, is that let's say we're starting to get into the air side where there are a lot of assets that are basically feeding back to our system with, let's say, live aircrafts, baggage handlers, even autonomous vehicles these days that are being rolled out. And all of that information needs to be consolidated onto a platform so that it can actually give early warning systems. So at any airport, right, the number one thing on the air side is preventing collisions. And even just a basic collision, let's say on the ground, right, that'll stop operations for hours at a time. And you can see sort of the butterfly effect of how that would affect a lot of the operational costs. And even just a single, let's say, operational collision can literally save $2 to $3 million just like that. And that's only a few hours of delays. So when we talk about something that's very high stakes, where we actually are starting to combine so many different data elements, it's starting to impact not only the operations of the airport, but also safety, security, also facilities management. How do you actually optimize the routes where the cleaning robots go so that it doesn't have to continuously spend time cleaning the same area? And that's where the 35 to 40 different departments are coming into play, where we believe, right, after so many years of deploying digital twins, smart city technologies, that we think this might be, I think at least based off of my experience of doing this for so many years, that might be one of the world's first true digital twins through the use of spatial technology. So that's why we're so excited to start talking about this. We're working with the Changi Airport to sort of also roll this out to the rest of the world.
Mhm. When you say the first true digital twin, you mean the airport is a twin? The whole airport
Yes,
is a digital twin?
it's starting
Mhm.
to become that, yeah.
Yeah. So what role did your spatial twins play? If we could zero in on them again, what role did they play specifically in delivering those savings? What was the difference that they made?
So the key thing of our technology is actually a web-based editing platform and a workflow system that allows any updates of the maps to basically be propagated to every other department. So that means that, let's say any tenant changes, any type of structure changes, they make updates on our maps, on our platform, and then it propagates all 40 departments. And that's interoperability at its core. So now, previously, they were actually paying a lot of money for updating of those maps to other vendors in every single department. And they had a different map for every department. So even if a gate closed or changed or got shut down, they have to actually send an email to every department and say, hey, can you please update your maps? And that, to me, is not efficient. And even in those savings, that's already starting to propagate across the entire operations. And now, once that actually gets updated, so basically they call it a single source of truth. I call it a center source of truth, where it becomes sort of the main map, the living, breathing map, where it's always being maintained by the various different departments. So terminal people change terminal side, air side changes air side, and that, again, propagates everybody. And that is the core, because if this map is not maintained and updated by the respective owners of that, then how do you actually overlay facilities management? How do you overlay everything else and trust it? And that's really where the savings starts getting multiplied.
So when you say the map, is that a combination of an actual visual map,
Yes.
but also a map in the sense of mapping? In other words, there's a lot of data underneath there that fills in the details of what people might be looking at.
Correct.
I said.
Correct. Yeah. And even any of your listeners can actually go on changyeairport.com. And the first link, if they scroll down maps, that is an anonymous view of only the user side, so the consumer side. But that is actually the digital twin, because that, based off of roles and permissions, is only allowing anonymous users to actually view the terminal maps. But all of the other departments, they have access to various different other parts of the airport. And that's really what makes it a living, breathing twin.
So in that case of Changi Airport, what did either your company or maybe the project leaders at the airport learn about some of the practical issues of implementing digital twins? Do you have a takeaway or two to share about those lessons?
Yeah, and I think this also goes into, the later question of where do we start, right? Do enterprises or governments have to start with a goal in mind and saying, yes, I want to start a new city to implement digital twins or spatial digital twins? And I say no, because we always think about brownfield or greenfield, right? I don't think it's necessary to have a goal in mind. I think what's necessary is to actually make the organizations get used to something that is much easier potentially in the long term. But you start small, right? Even if you think about starting with consumer maps, like what you can see on changyeairport.com or Changi app, if you even start with that layer, and then you start seeing the interoperability between different departments, not just for consumers, that's already starting to get more and more useful, right? Case in point, another use case, even from a consumer side, is that let's say there's an issue, like an emergency happening in one of the terminal areas, somebody can actually tag it, right? And at, let's say, safety and security and say, hey, there's an emergency going on, right? So it's similar to a 911 call, except it's spatialized. And that makes it very fluid and easy to understand where these things are happening in the real world.
What would you say is the biggest thing, if it's possible, name one thing that people misunderstand or maybe have a misconception about digital twins?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is that these days we're starting to see all sorts of companies start talking about digital twins because it's sort of the hot new thing, right? And when they start showcasing what they're doing, a lot of it is visualization, to be honest. And I've been in that game for so long where we've implemented so many of these 3D visualization twins that essentially, I mean, if you think about it, even a scan of a room, people are saying it's a digital twin. But that's not live, right? That's just a scan. I mean, I can literally take a photo right now of my room with my phone. Is that a twin? So I think that's a major, major misconception of why the term digital twins is actually being bastardized, to be honest. And another reason why I think that in order to actually create and push forward a true digital twin, well, first of all, it doesn't have to be 3D, right, to be useful. At the end of the day, people always ask, why 3D? Is 3D a true ROI? And I say right now, yeah, it's great to look at in marketing, right, at trade shows. It's great to show off. But at the end of the day, does every single one of our users who need to use it, do they have a massive graphics card, right, running all of these major video games? I don't think so. I don't think it's necessary. And that is, I would say, the number one misconception that I've been hearing, where a lot of other companies are pushing that, where I don't think it's necessary. And that's why when you go to our version of these spatial twins these days, it starts with 2D. If the customer wants to actually connect all of the live data to 3D, they can, and they can show it off. But at the core, it's really the operations of all of that, all of the assets, all of the information that's moving about, like icons essentially on a 2D map. Is it good enough for operations? And usually people say yes.
Mhm. I noticed that same confusion about the terminology when I started covering this in some depth back around 5, 6 years ago, trying to get a real definition of digital twin. And it was really clear from Gartner and some of the others that were really focusing on it back then when the first wave of excitement started happening, that it's really more about the data and like the liveness. You mentioned being live.
Yes.
You don't necessarily, I think this is still true, you don't necessarily have to have a visual image for it to be a twin. Is that still the case, would you say?
I think it depends on the use case, but for us, a lot of our customers, they manage large spaces. So when it comes to that, there's some type of visualization, some type of mapping is good enough. And I think that's really critical. And I think, if it's a piece of equipment where they don't really care about where it should belong somewhere on Earth, then yeah, I think that's okay to really focus on just data and telemetry. And you can even look at meters and whatnot. But more and more, I think because, let's say, equipment or just the more advancement of IoT is starting to penetrate into every environment, every single building. It's not just CCTVs anymore, right? There's sensors everywhere. There's HVAC systems, facilities management, and that's becoming more and more important to spatialize it. I mean, even my smart home, all right, even accessing the cameras, right? I have, I think, 5 or 6 cameras. And every single time I look at a list of even 5, I get a little overwhelmed and I have to process in my mind, hey, where exactly is this camera? Every single time. I don't know, maybe something's wrong with me, but if we can spatialize, if I can look at a map of my home, right, in 2D or 3D, and I can just click on the corner where that little icon is, that will save a lot of what I call cognitive load on trying to convert sort of the 2D into, or the 3D into 2D and vice versa. So I think when we're walking home and looking around, that's how we experience the world. So why can't our software also provide that?
Right. So as of now, mid 2025, what are the biggest challenges standing in the way of broader deployment, especially of spatial digital twins?
I would say it's always the barrier of entry and the cost, right? That's always a number one issue that we're seeing a lot of customers face. And I think that when it comes to, let's say, when they think about digital twins or anything like that, and again, going back to how we were just talking about the visualization of 3D, they think that that's going to be expensive. And I think that's really an issue in the entire industry moving forward. So that's why what we would like to actually focus on, and we tell our customers and say, hey, start small, right? Start with a single layer, right? You have a map, you have a floor plan, let's just start with that. And we can start putting that, making it into something that they update and maintain themselves. And then you overlay some IoT element, right? It could be very simple. So I think these days, it's really cost-conscious customers is number one, and really the market education of what is a digital twin and can we actually afford it? They always ask that. So that's why I start showing them, hey, look, you're not an airport. Right? You don't have 10 million bucks to actually spend to save on costs. However, can we start with 10,000? Can we look at your building? What's this worth to you? What's the ROI worth to you to understanding, let's say, even for ESG, right? Sustainability. Does it actually make sense for you to spend a little bit to actually get more data back? Because data is king, right? Once you actually understand that data of your building, can you actually get more credits out of that? Essentially, it's the same thing for myself personally, where I have all of these devices. I have an Apple Watch where I get telemetry of my own body, right? Whatever I'm doing, I understand more data. And I think that's really the key, because inside of any building, if there are no human beings in it, then what's the point, right? There's no point to install anything. It's essentially a dead building. However, if there are human beings involved in different departments, it's essentially a mimic of our bodies, circulation systems and nervous systems that are working together. And I think that's really the critical thing where we're trying to apply a lot of biology into sort of the cold hard spaces of all of these spatial twins.
What's your vision of the business potential if spatial digital twins become more widely adopted?
I mean, I essentially think that this can scale extremely, extremely effectively to every single department, every single employee, where essentially right now, every employee has access to information on their phones. They're using apps. They're using, let's say, email or instant messages or let's say an ERP system or something, right? They're accessing some information from the enterprise. And I think more and more, because we all operate in spaces, right? We're operating a space or inside of a space in conjunction with other coworkers. Is there a way to actually operate together on that spatial twin? And I think the ramifications of that is massive. And that's why I think when it comes to the airport, right, one of the key areas that we focus on is trying to figure out and sort of unwrap what is the hardest use case in all spaces, where essentially an airport it's a city within itself. And it's easier to actually understand that because it's an enterprise, right? It's actually run like a business from top down. So unlike smart cities where every single department, they don't really talk to each other and might be harder to actually interoperate. But with airports, it has to be more efficient. It must to really push forward the savings. So I think I like to say that, hey, if we can actually start showing a lot of true ROI through a true spatial digital twin with one of the most complicated and advanced spaces on Earth, can we start shrinking that down and literally zooming in into the smaller aspects of spaces, whether that's smart buildings, whether that's even restaurants? What about conferences, expos, anything that's really moving, right? Things are changing and data is being updated. So I think the ramifications of this technology is massive.
Well, it'll be very interesting to follow. Eric, I thank you again for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. Really, you had a great time, David.
Thank you for listening to Enterprise Apps Unpacked, where we give the real story on the software that runs your business. To learn more about business applications, explore our content on searcherp.com. Find us on YouTube at our channel, Eye on Tech. Subscribe to our podcast to receive the latest episodes as they drop. And if you liked what you heard today, give us a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Until next time.
Podcast programming and promotion by Kelsey Waddell. Podcast production and quality oversight by Anne Steshu. Music supplied by DP via Getty Images. This is an Informa Tech Target production.